So everybody, welcome again to the first GraphQL NYC meetup. It's super awesome to be here. I feel like every time I come to New York, there's so many great people to meet. Today I'm really excited to tell you about this new project that we've been working on. This is the first time we've actually really talked about it, about a new way that we've come up with to help you decouple your GraphQL schema. And then we'll get into what that means and what the different trade-offs there. My name is Sashko. I'm the open source lead at Apollo. You might know us from a bunch of different GraphQL tools that we've been working on. We're excited to keep working on that stuff. And let's get into it. So as you guys might know, or if you are just showing up, you've probably already learned that GraphQL is pretty awesome. When we talk to people consistently, the number one thing that people say is the best thing about GraphQL is that it unifies all of your data into one schema and one API. Instead of having to call multiple different endpoints to get the data, you can just go to one place, go to one API Explorer, start typing, and get that data right away. You don't have to make multiple requests, which is also great for performance. There's also a lot of other great side effects to GraphQL, like you get great tools, like you just saw from Joel before, you see all this other stuff. But really, the main thing that we see for people that's really transformative in their organization is that they can organize all their data and really understand what's going on instead of having to go talk to a whole bunch of teams to put together that app that you're trying to build. So really, it's something you could think about from going from disorganized to organized. And don't worry about that extra hexagon that crept into the diagram on the right. But then there's a question, which is, well, if we've organized our stuff so much, if we put everything behind this unified API, what about coupling? I've learned that it's really great to have a bunch of different APIs because that means that I'm not coupling all of my different stuff together. Is GraphQL going to take me back to my days of monolithic development? There's a lot of different ways that you might want to have different kinds of diversity in your infrastructure. Some which are easier to handle and some which are harder. So one of the things that GraphQL is really easy for and really good at is handling lots of different kinds of backend data sources. So as you guys might know, you can easily put GraphQL just like a REST API. You can put it on top of other REST APIs. You can put it on top of a database, caches, all kinds of stuff like that. James is tweeting. That's pretty cool. No, it's okay. So that's really easy. But if you have different teams collaborating on the same API, that might get a little bit harder because you might end up in some political situations where maybe somebody owns the code base, you want to contribute to that, but maybe they have different opinions than you. It might not be great to have to put everything through exactly one server. And it's even harder if you have different technological requirements, right? There are a lot of different GraphQL implementations. For example, there are things like PostGraphQL, which will put a GraphQL API on top of your Postgres database automatically. There's services like Graphcool that will let you stand up a production-ready GraphQL server really easily. But not all these services can really encompass like the entire scope of what you need, right? Not all of your data is going to be in Postgres, or not all of it might be in Graphcool. You might have to combine different things. So you might end up with multiple GraphQL servers because either different people built them or you needed different types of things from those servers. So a lot of people we talk to are in a situation, and we hear about this in the context of the client because people talk about Apollo client, they're like, how do we connect to multiple GraphQL servers? But then you think about it and you're like, oh, wait, but I thought the whole point of GraphQL was that I can just go to one place to get all the data that I need. So what can we do about this? So the first thing people ask about is, let's say I do have one GraphQL API code base. How do I make it modular? How do I avoid coupling together different stuff? And this is one thing that we've been talking about for a long time, for maybe a year and a half now, is, and if you might also have heard this from some people at Facebook, that it's nice to separate your GraphQL server into a bit of a layered architecture. So at the top, you have your schema, which defines the external interface to your server. And that's hopefully the only thing that people consuming your API need to know about. Then underneath that, just like you would in any other kind of API, you want to have a set of models or a set of business logic objects, that deal with stuff like the concept of a user, the concept of an event or a post or a comment. And then underneath that, you can put things that know details about the transport layer to whatever backend you're talking to. Maybe that's your database client or your REST client that handles e-tags or something like that. And that already gets you pretty far because you can have people work on their particular set of the business logic and the models. And because your schema layer can be really thin, it's not really a big deal for a lot of people to work on that at once. Or hopefully that's the case. So you can kind of decouple your server inside that code base. And you can see some examples of this on various Apollo examples, various blog posts people have written. And you can even go a little bit further and organize, even though every GraphQL server has exactly one query type, one mutation type, and one subscription type, you can put the fields for those in different modules and then import them and attach them all to one type. So you don't have to write all of your query fields in like one file or something like that. But sometimes that's not enough. So you guys might have heard some of the benefits of microservices that people have quoted throughout the years. So I think the core idea here is how can you iterate on your part of the backend or your part of the application without blocking other people? It might enable you to write different microservices in totally different languages. It might enable you to have a different team structure where maybe you have one team that owns both the front end and the back end for a particular feature. And one of the things that I'm most excited about in the microservice type model is that you don't have to necessarily have a single release process. You might be able to push out a feature fix for your particular part of the back end without having to wait for somebody else to be ready to push their code as well. So GraphQL seems like it should fit really nicely into this because GraphQL has this vibe of being really modular, right? Instead of hard coding certain endpoints, you can pick and choose the data that you want for every request. So it feels like it should be really easy to get some of these same benefits. So what is the state of the art for integrating multiple GraphQL services today? What if you wanted to split your GraphQL server into actual multiple physical APIs, multiple servers that have different parts of your GraphQL schema? Well, it turns out because GraphQL can call almost any backend, you can call a GraphQL query from inside your GraphQL server. And people always talk about using GraphQL as a gateway to REST, to gRPC, and you can use it for GraphQL as well. But it's kind of a bummer, and as I'll show you in a second in this example, there's not any benefit to actually having a GraphQL API behind another GraphQL API. You still have to write a bunch of queries, you have to manually do the batching, manually do everything. And from my perspective as a promoter of GraphQL technologies, if you will, it's annoying because there's no benefit. Like if your friend is using GraphQL or your coworker, there's not really any benefit to you if you also want to use it because you kind of have to start from scratch every time. And one great example, and I don't want to throw Graphcool under the bus because it's a great service, but there's an example of integrating Graphcool with the GitHub API, which really stood out to me. Because this is a code base that suggests a certain way of integrating a GraphQL API with another GraphQL API, and it's kind of sad because you go here and you see a really big query. Okay, so I already don't really get to pick which data I'm fetching. This is all the data I'm going to get from the GitHub API. And then at the end of the day, you just end up having to attach all of it to one giant object, just like you had to do before when you were fetching from a REST API. And that's because right now the state of the art of combining GraphQL data with other GraphQL data is not that great. All right. So because in GraphQL it's super easy to traverse data inside your schema, what if you could traverse data between multiple GraphQL schemas? So maybe I should just get over it and avoid stop having the buildup and get to what I'm trying to say. So what I really wanted to introduce is a new feature in GraphQL Tools. GraphQL Tools is a library that we have for generating and working with GraphQL schemas. And as of a couple of days ago, we started working on a new feature that we call schema stitching. And schema stitching, in its current form, involves three particular features. One is the ability to make a GraphQL schema from introspection that actually points to that remote schema. So you can create a GraphQL schema object, which is actually kind of just a proxy to somewhere else. And then the second thing is this merge schemas function that lets you take multiple GraphQL schemas, whether they're local or remote, and combine them into one schema object. You guys can check out all the details in that pull request, and I'll share these slides afterwards. So let's do a quick demo. And of course, during my demo, I'm going to have to promote the GraphQL event of at least the second half of the year, GraphQL Summit. So there are two APIs that are going to be in play here. So let me just go. How do I get out and not go full screen? Oh, here we go. Okay. So recently, Universe, which is a ticketing provider, announced that they're betting on GraphQL and that they're launching a public GraphQL API. That was really, really convenient for my presentation because it turns out that now, if I can get rid of this, the window popped up for Zoom. Okay, so you can go to a GraphQL Explorer now on the Universe website, and you can actually get details about GraphQL Summit. So if you get the event ID, you can run a query, you can get the title of the event, you can get the address, you can get the city where it's happening. And then there's another API I'm really excited about, which is actually built on Launchpad, which is a service you can use to kind of stand up nice demo schemas, which lets you get weather for a certain location. So it ties into an API called Dark Sky, which is, I guess, a place where you can put in a location, get weather and other information about that place. So it turns out that, GraphQL Summit is happening in the city of San Francisco. That's this line. And then with this API, we can put in the city of San Francisco and find out what the weather is there. And without the schema stitching approach, it would have been actually super annoying to build a GraphQL server that combined those two things. But now it's really, really easy. So let me show you what you need to do to combine these two APIs into one that will let us both retrieve the information about the event and then get the weather there. And here I'll have the query that we're trying to run. So we'd like to run a query that gets the event, retrieves some information about that, then gets the location and retrieves some information about that, including the weather from the other API. So using schema stitching from GraphQL tools, which is not 100% done yet. So by the time you watch this talk on the internet, it might be way better. Or you guys should actually go to the PR and contribute, and I'll tell you guys how to do that in a second. So it's very, very simple now. All we have to do is make one remote schema for the universe API for ticketing. And you just pass the URL and it introspects it and gets that schema for you. Then you make another schema that points to that Launchpad API I was talking about to get the weather. And you just call this merge schemas function that I was talking about. So this part is pretty simple. We just pass in two schemas here, and we can add a prefix to do some namespacing to avoid collisions between different types and fields and stuff like that. And then we can add a link. And the link is pretty simple. It has a GraphQL type that we're starting with. Then it has the name of the field on that type, which we're going to call location. And that is going to proxy to a field called location on the weather API. So like I said before, you can get the location based on the name San Francisco. And then these other two arguments are just about converting a field on event, which is city name, to an argument on the weather schema, which is called place. So it says, get the city name of the parent object and pass that into the place argument. All right, and now, before the talk, this worked, so I hope it still works. Now I should be able to run this query. And, it does indeed return from the universe API, the location of the event, the name of the venue, and then for the city of San Francisco, the current weather and temperature. So. I'm so excited about that. And the thing that I couldn't convey in this talk is the feeling that you get when you can take two APIs and then write like 3 lines of code to get an API that's twice as big. And I just couldn't be more excited for a future where you can just like, the promise of the like API web and the data web and stuff like that was that you could mash these things up super easily. But I feel like we never quite got there before. And I think this might be the start of a whole new world of being able to use all that kind of data. So you guys can click on these links here. I'll also post the example later, but definitely something fun to play around with. And I can't go forward without mentioning GraphQL Summit again. So GraphQL Summit is the GraphQL conference in North America. It's happening in October 25th and 26th in about 2 months. And we actually have a special promo code for GraphQL NYC. That's for people here and for people on the stream. So if you type in GraphQL NYC when you're checking out, you'll get a 10% discount on the tickets. And we're already sold out of the first round of tickets. So you want to get on the second round of tickets soon before it gets to the third round. And you can use this code. All right, so what about schema stitching? So there are a couple of things to consider. First of all, we need to make it actually work. This demo just really barely came together before this talk, but I couldn't wait to share it with everybody. James is laughing because he saw me staying up last night to get that to function. But there's a lot of work to be done still. So for example, it needs to be a lot more efficient. Like if we have a lot of different fields that we're proxying to different kinds of APIs, we want to do some efficient batching there so we're not bombarding APIs with more requests than they need to do. And then there's kind of some usage considerations, right? It might not always be easy to split a really large schema cleanly into different parts. So you might, right now it seems to me like a really good idea in the future that people might build their GraphQL servers as these smaller components and stitch them together. but we'll have to really see if that works to see if that's a way that people should actually do things. There's some other considerations, like maybe you might duplicate some types between schemas, right? You might have a generic type like address, and you don't want to end up with 5 different address types in your schema from every different kind of API. So you might want to have some way to specify shared types, either globally via something like schema.org, or maybe just a manual way to link those types between schemas. But I'm really, really excited for more people to try this approach and see how it works. And especially because there are all these cool little public GraphQL APIs now, creating mashups from those might be a really cool way to investigate this without over-investing in it in your internal architecture. But I think there are a lot of super huge benefits to this new way of creating GraphQL servers. The main thing that's important for me is that this will really make it easier for you to adopt GraphQL if somebody else is already using it. So if you ever wanted to build an application on top of GitHub, now that GitHub has a GraphQL API, you could add just a couple of extra types and a couple of extra fields where you need it, and super simple to create an app that uses that data together. You might be able to version, test, and deploy different parts of your schema separately. So different people who own different parts of the backend might be able to work on their schema in whatever language or technology they prefer, and deploy that the way they want to do that. And then you don't have to worry about it when you're querying that API because it still looks like a unified API. And like I said, integrating with public APIs, I think, is also going to be a really big use case, or even stitching together multiple public APIs. So here's what you should do next. If you're interested in this kind of approach, if you think that having a modular GraphQL scheme is something that will help you, please join the Apollo Slack team. It's one of the biggest GraphQL communities out there, and we have a channel about this topic on there that you can join in and talk about it. Go to that pull request and try some of the alpha releases. And tell us about what bugs you see, and if you want to jump in and help write some of the code and contribute, I will be more than happy to help you with that. And in general, build more GraphQL APIs, especially public ones, so that there's more things that people can stitch together and create really cool apps. Also, I want to mention that we're hiring. So if you guys are looking for jobs, whether that's as a front engineer, a backend engineer, or you want to work on open source GraphQL stuff, just DM me on Twitter. That's the easiest way to reach me, and I will definitely get back to you. And thank you very much. And if you ask a question, I will try to give you a t-shirt. Thank you. Kyle. The question was very specific. Have we talked to the Wikimedia Foundation about getting a public Wikipedia GraphQL API? We haven't. But if you're from the Wikimedia Foundation and you're watching this talk, please talk to me so we can make that happen. Yeah, I think it would be great if there was, I think somebody was also working on a repository that lists various public GraphQL APIs. I think it might have been the API Gurus people. So that might be a good place to go shopping for APIs to add to your schema. Yes. The question is, in the example I had in Graphical, are there actually docs for the different APIs that are stitched together? There indeed are, because this thing is 100% a legit GraphQL schema. I'm not actually sure if, yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's got descriptions and everything. I mean, it basically depends on the APIs you're stitching together if the people who wrote those bothered to create descriptions. But yeah, you get a 100% legit GraphQL schema that has all the types, all the descriptions, all the definitions, all the everything. And you can call it just like you would any other schema. Yeah, I mentioned using namespaces to avoid collisions, but there weren't a lot of namespaces in this query. And that is a true fact. These two APIs happen to fit together really nicely and not have any type collisions. But there's a lot of questions about namespacing just because like putting underscores before stuff looks kind of ugly. So there might be some room for namespaces in the GraphQL specification. Maybe it's something that you can manually overwrite some types that collide. I think that's something that we'll have to test out a couple of options for before we get to the right solution. Okay, one more question. Is the question, is it better to have separate schemas for different parts of the product, or is it better to have one big schema? And part of the schema is the same because the concepts overlap? Yeah, so I'll try to include kind of the question inside my answer. I think at the end of the day, the best outcome for everybody is to have one GraphQL schema that you can query. Like the fewer GraphQL schemas there are, the better, because most of the benefits of GraphQL lie in organizing your data together, being able to fetch it in one query, all of those different things that let you do less data processing. So what I'm hoping to create, and a lot of people that we're talking to while we were investigating for this project for schema stitching, is a world where you can feel like you're creating a lot of smaller schemas to avoid the overhead of working on this giant code base, but still end up with one schema at the end that looks like it was written as one schema, right? It shouldn't have any like duplicate types or anything like that, so that you can get all of those main benefits of GraphQL, like being able to organize everything together. So I think if I were, in a really large organization with multiple teams, I would want to move closer to a world where I have exactly one schema for all of my data. And yeah, I think that's all the questions I can take. But super happy to keep talking about this. This is like, I'm so excited. And thank you guys for listening.